Education Committee at the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce. And
إذا تدوسين هاي يشتغل الفيديو.
بس ما بال
It's a pleasure to meet you, Professor Waheed.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to all of us to have you with us this afternoon.
I was telling Dr. Ahmed earlier, it was actually my pleasure to wake up so early because we had a rare lunar eclipse here this morning. I would not have seen it were I not driving into work. So.
Okay.
A very good afternoon to you from the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and thank you for joining us today in this webinar on building curious schools for better students' learning. My name is Aisha, and I'm a member of the media team of the Bahrain Chamber. With me here today is Dr. Ahmed Al-Kufi. Dr. Ahmed is a member of the Education Committee of the Chamber. He is also a renowned international consultant in school quality assurance and improvement. He is the founder and CEO of Quality House Consultancy. Our guest speaker is Dr. Brian Goodwin. Dr. Brian is joining us virtually from Denver in the United States. He is the CEO of Mackrell International and the author of Building Curious Schools, Restoring the Joy That Brought You to School. He is also the author and co-author of many other titles on curiosity and school improvement. Before we get started, I would like to let you know that interpretation from Arabic to English and vice versa is available, so you can click on the interpretation icon. This webinar is available on Zoom and also our YouTube channel, Bahrain Chamber. Please feel free to share the link of the YouTube channel with your friends and colleagues. Now, the last part of today's webinar will be dedicated for your questions and comments. Feel free to type them in the chat box or click on the hand icon to address them directly to our speakers at the end. Now, this webinar is all about igniting curiosity. I hope you're as excited and curious as I am about the content of this webinar. So I will leave the floor now to Dr. Ahmed Al-Kufi. Thank you. Dr. Ahmed?
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I am very pleased and happy that we are inviting Brian today with us to speak about curiosity. As you know that this is the third event that Chamber of Commerce with the lead from Dr. Waheed, the chairperson of Education Committee, we have conducted two events for university and one for KG, and this is for schools, the third one. We've selected this topic with Brian because we know that the effect of pandemic on the world and especially in Bahrain in education that leaves our students not in the direction and in the position that we would like to be. I am very pleased and happy that Brian accepts our invitation and he is with us here to share his views and really good experience in curiosity, where he has a model of engaging and helping schools and schools around the world, and as I know in Australia and UK and Canada, to help them engage their students in learning rather than they learn for grades. Today, we will learn lots of things, new things to help your students, to help your children, and even to improve the schools or universities as well, with regard to making learning fun, good for students, and really they like it. Let us start by today with Brian, please. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. And thank you, Professor Waheed and the Bahrain Chamber. It's my pleasure. I'm humbled and honored to be here with you all this afternoon for you, this morning for me here in Denver, Colorado. Thank you also to our partner, Dr. Ahmed Al-Kufi from Quality House Consulting, who helped make all of this happen. So it's my pleasure to be with you all this morning. As Dr. Ahmed mentioned, my organization, Mackrell International, does work all over the world. We're based here in Denver, Colorado at the base of the Rocky Mountains. We have an office in Honolulu, Hawaii, that we serve the entire Pacific region from Hawaii to Palau. We also have done work all across Australia. And in fact, it's really our work in Australia that alerted us to a different way to go about teaching and learning, a focus on curiosity, which is what I'm excited to share with you. We also have a growing portfolio of work in the Gulf States region as well, in Bahrain and UAE and other locations too. So I'm afraid that my Arabic is somewhat limited, so I'm glad you have a translator, but assalamu alaikum to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. And I want to share with you some of the things that we have been seeing as the pandemic has spread across the world. Of course, it's affected education systems all across the world. And what we have seen is that in a lot of cases, you know, student achievement has suffered, student engagement, student attendance, teacher well-being, student well-being, all of these things have really been impacted negatively by the pandemic. But I believe what we've been seeing are really cracks in the foundation of how we've been going about teaching and learning worldwide for decades. And I know there's a number of factors that have been to blame. You might say, well, it's lack of internet access. There's been a lot of food insecurity in some places, and certainly students have struggled to find a quiet place to learn online. But my point here is that I think there are three maybe major flaws in how we've thought about teaching and learning and how we've designed our education systems around that. And the first one, and maybe the most important one, is this, is that we tend to rely too much on external, not intrinsic rewards to motivate students. And what I mean by that is this, is that we tend to think about motivating students through things like stickers or gold stars or test scores, course grades, class rank, as a way to essentially get students to learn things they don't want to learn, but we want them to learn. And a lot of times, I used to be a teacher, I would find myself trying to tell kids, yes, this will be on the test. But if they were to ask me, why is it on the test? I would have to say, I don't know, it's just because it's on the test. And that's not a very good way to motivate students. And what it really suggests sometimes is that we as adults haven't really figured out exactly why we're asking students to learn the things that we're asking them to learn. And I would invite you to think about this for a moment. Consider anything that you have really mastered, that you would say you were pretty proficient at. Maybe it's a musical instrument. Maybe it's playing a sport like soccer or handball. Maybe it's an artistic talent, but something that you've really nurtured to a high level. Likely at some point along the way, you decided you wanted to invest that kind of time and energy into learning something, mastering something, because you found that it was intrinsically rewarding to you. You found it pleasurable to become an expert at something. You enjoyed the process of learning. And for myself, for example, I spend a lot of time, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, writing books, writing articles. I do that not because I want to get rich and famous. I can assure you I'm neither. I do it because I love it. It's something that I really find passion in. I'm sure that you all have something similar. Also, why do I wake up at 4 in the morning to talk to you all? It's not simply because Dr. Ahmed is really persuasive. He is, but it's also because I love doing it. And so I think you all have something, I'm sure, in your lives that you find that kind of passion and interest with. And if you're a parent, that's what you want for your child as well, right? You want your child to find something that they can be passionate about, that they do just because it brings its own rewards for them, not because they're seeking financial gain or social recognition, but because they truly enjoy it. But because we tend to build our education system around extrinsic rewards, not intrinsic rewards, it leads us to a second flaw in our current approach to schooling, which is that because we tie everything to extrinsic rewards, we tend to design learning around what we can put on a test, what we can measure easily. But as you know, there's an adage that says, not everything that measures matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. But as a result of our emphasis on testing, the whole process of learning seems to become one of attempting to download stuff into students' minds, testing them on it to see if they got it, and then moving on to the next step. So oftentimes, our methodology looks like this. We teach something, students practice it, they study it, and then we test them on it. So that's kind of our methodology. But we know from research actually on brain science that to get something deeply into our long-term memories, we have to do more than just encounter it a few times. We actually need to keep coming back to that concept, to actually apply it and to do things that look more like this. Instead of this repetitious teach, study, test cycle, we want to extend student learning through things like projects or research or presentations that really make them take what they've learned. And I'm not saying that all testing is bad. We want to test kids to see what they understand, but then give them the opportunity to do these things and to apply it more deeply. And again, as I said, brain science shows that the more times we come back to learning, the more ways we actually use that learning to, make a historical argument, to engage in a science project, to present what we've learned, the more deeply embedded that learning becomes in our memory. And this is why it's important, because sometimes you'll hear teachers say, but I don't have time for all those projects, right? My job is to teach something, I test the kids on it, and then I move on. Students' jobs are to learn. But here's the reality though, and this comes also from research, that we know that students tend to forget about 90% of what they learn in the classroom within 30 days. So what we're doing isn't exactly working. And think about that for a moment. That's a 10% success rate. You wouldn't want your doctor or your airline pilot saying, don't worry, I get great results about 10% of the time. And yet, this is kind of the system that we've designed. And I always say this, I'm not trying to blame teachers. This is the system that a lot of us have inherited. This is the system that we learned under. And most of us muddled through, we got through it, but it wasn't exactly joyful or productive. And we oftentimes found ourselves losing a lot of what we had learned very, very shortly after we left the classroom or the test was over. So here's the third, I think, flaw in how we approach teaching and learning and schooling, is that because of this emphasis on extrinsic motivation, we tend to also rely too much on quick fixes and ready-made solutions to improve our schools, instead of stepping back a moment and saying, maybe we need to redesign the process and really work on building teacher capacity so they can operate as true professionals. For example, it basically becomes we tape over the problem and pretend that crack in the foundation isn't there. Maybe if math scores are low, we go out and we get a new math program, or we buy new math textbooks thinking, well, better textbooks should help with the math achievement. Or the same thing, can you hear me now? Okay. Or sometimes we rely too much on technology. We think some new innovation is going to completely change how we do things. So we spend a lot of money. We see this all over the world. We spend it on things like interactive whiteboards, or maybe it's new online learning platforms, things that can enhance learning. But if we haven't really figured out what we're trying to do in the classroom, it's really just enhancing an already flawed approach. Here's, I think, maybe the good news, and what we've been seeing more and more in schools that we've worked with all over the world, is that because this pandemic was such a disruption, people are beginning to realize this adage, this wisdom that comes from business literature, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So if we're seeing kids that are disengaged, that are forgetting much of what they learned in the classroom shortly later, or if we're seeing teachers who keep thinking, I don't think these kids can learn, I don't know what else to do with them, it's because we've designed the system to be that way. Worldwide, though, I think we're seeing schools that are saying, we need to rethink what we're doing. What happened with the pandemic, a lot of times we took what was not working in person and face-to-face and put it online, and we got predictable results. So I think there's a moment now to consider how might we go about doing things better. And this is where we've arrived as an organization, Mackrell International. We're a nonprofit. We do work all over the world. What is the key to really transforming our systems of schooling? And we thought that it's really about reconstructing learning around intrinsic motivation, this We know from research that intrinsic motivation is far more powerful than extrinsic motivation. So we want to help students master things because they find interest in them, because they see the value of learning something. And I think there's a single word that captures this sense of intrinsically motivated, personally goal-directed learning. And it's this, it's curiosity. When you think about it, if you're curious about something, sometimes nothing will stop you from learning about that. You have to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper to get to an answer. So you might wonder, well, so why have we as an organization at Mackrell focused so much of our attention on curiosity? Let me give you a few data points that come from research that illustrate the power of curiosity. The first is this. Studies have found that students' level of curiosity is as important as their intelligence, their IQ, in student success. That's the first big piece. Secondly, we also know curiosity is as important as persistence in student success. You've probably heard a lot of people talking about, persistence as being the key to student success, grit, sometimes it's called. But what we know is curiosity actually matters more than persistence. We also know this, once our students leave the world, and this is probably important to you all at the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce and Industry, people who are curious have higher levels of job performance, which isn't surprising because when you think about it, a curious person is always trying to figure out better ways of doing their job. They're always engaged in on-the-job learning, they're retooling themselves, they're figuring out what the new technology means for them. So we want our students to leave our schools curious as well. We also know from an interpersonal perspective, studies find this, people who are curious have better relationships. When you think about it, the key to relationships is asking people questions about themselves, really demonstrating interest in other people. So we want our students also to be curious. And not surprisingly, if you have all these other things, we also find studies show that curiosity is correlated with happiness, with well-being, with life satisfaction. So, which makes sense too, because when we are curious, life is an adventure. Every morning is something exciting. I was sharing earlier, this morning there was a lunar eclipse, which I found really fascinating, right? So if you have curiosity, you look up in the sky and say, wow, that's really fascinating. It makes your life a better life. We also know this, strangely from studies, and maybe perhaps a little bit morbidly, studies performed on surveys of senior citizens, people who are living in retirement homes and nursing homes, have found that people that are curious are more likely to live longer than people who lack curiosity. Probably for a variety of reasons. Again, life is an adventure. When you're curious, you're happier. You may also have curiosity about your own health and what you need to do to stay healthy. Finally, we know this is also probably important to the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce. Curiosity is correlated with better leadership. We want our leaders to be curious about the world around them, about the people they're serving, about their own staff and employees. So curiosity is really important for effective business growth as well. So you think about all these things that curiosity can provide. Is there a better gift for us to give our students than curiosity? So let me unpack a few things that we know about the power of curiosity when it comes to student learning, which is of course the focus of my remarks this afternoon. The first thing we know is that curiosity actually drives deeper learning. When we are curious, we tend to better retain the information that we've learned. And we actually know some of these things from brain science, from neuroscience. Studies of the brain have found that when people are curious and they get their curiosity satisfied, so when we have a question and we get that question answered, studies find that at that moment of getting our curiosity satisfied, our brains release dopamine. We activate our dopamine reward centers. And you probably know that dopamine is the same brain chemical that's associated with, eating a piece of chocolate, winning a prize, right? Good things when they happen to us, or you hear a funny joke, actually laughter is associated with dopamine. So what this means is curiosity can make learning rewarding. And in fact, somewhat addictive in a good way, right? We want our kids to be addicted to learning. That's a positive addiction. We also know that studies have shown this, that when we have a question, that's our own question, our own curiosity, and get that question answered, we are more likely to retain that information than if we learn something that really we were not that interested in or curious about in the first place. And here's the third thing that I think is really fascinating as well, is that these same studies have found that when we are curious, we actually tend to learn things incidentally. That was not part of the focus of our curiosity. Somehow curiosity appears to prime our brains for learning, like a runner in the starting block. We're ready to go. Our brains are ready to learn when they are experiencing curiosity. So it's not surprising then that we would see that curiosity is a powerful lever for improving student learning. Here's, I think, maybe one of the most important things about curiosity as well, which is this, is that we don't have to teach anyone to be curious. We don't have to teach students or kids to be curious. If you have a young child at home, you know that to be true. They are asking questions all the time, literally hundreds of questions a day. We know that our young people are naturally curious. That's actually part of being a human being. That's how we've developed civilizations. That's how we've spread all across the world, is through our curiosity. So basically what we know is that when students arrive in school, they are burgeoning, blooming, blossoming with curiosity. And yet we also know that the longer they stay in school, the less curiosity they demonstrate. It's like a flower that starts to wilt in the sun. So let me give you an example or illustrate that point a little bit. Studies have found this. So this is a researcher in the US. She went and observed classrooms, looking at kindergarten students of age 5 students, observed them, and she found this, that every student individually demonstrated on average 2.36 episodes of curiosity over a 2-hour period. Then she went and she observed 5th grade students, so students are about age 10 or so. And she found that over a 2-hour period, each individual student demonstrated on average 0.48 episodes of curiosity over a 2-hour period. That means there were some students who could sit in a classroom for 2 hours and never have a moment where they raised their hand or where they asked a question or where they got interested in what they were doing. So we have some students that we know go through their entire school day never experiencing curiosity, which seems backwards from how we'd want schooling to be for our students. So why does this happen? Well, Susan Engel, the same researcher here, has done studies of this. And here's one of the studies that she conducted. She had something called a curiosity box, which was basically a cabinet with 27 little drawers in it. Each drawer had some kind of trinket or surprise for kids. So the idea is that each drawer, you'd be curious, what am I going to find in the drawers? And it should be almost addictive, right? That kids want to go up there and open every drawer to see what's in the cabinet. So Dr. Engels set the box in the back of the classrooms, and she would just observe what happened. And here's what she noticed was that there was a lot of variability in how much the students interacted with the curiosity box. However, the variability was all tied to classrooms. In other words, in some classrooms, yes, even 5th grade classrooms, the students would all get up and interact with the box. In other classrooms, even for younger students, say in kindergarten or 1st grade, the students would barely touch the box, which tells us that that teachers are the key variable for student curiosity. And in fact, she observed that in some cases, teachers would discourage students from interacting with the curiosity box because she would say, I still don't have your assignment yet, or from Friday. Other teachers, meanwhile, would say in the morning, look, there's something interesting in the back of the classroom. Maybe you want to take a look. So here's what else she noticed, though, as she was observing teachers, is that a lot of times teachers felt like they were under too much pressure, had too many things to do before they could really focus on curiosity. So she conducted this experiment because she was wondering about what conditions do we create for teachers that might lead them to say, I don't have time for curiosity. So here was the experiment that she conducted. She invited teachers to come in and work one-on-one with a student. The teachers thought they were studying a science curriculum. So there was a worksheet, there was a science experiment that the kids were supposed to go through following the worksheet. Here's how the study worked, though. Right before the researcher left the room, they would randomly say one of two things. For half of the teachers, they would say, have fun doing the worksheet. For the other half of teachers, they would say, have fun learning about science. So changing the word, doing the worksheet versus learning about science. Now what would happen is in the middle of that experiment, the students who were actually working with the researchers would deliberately get off task. They would do something that was not on the worksheet. The science experiment involved putting things in a jar of water to see if they would float or not. So the students would deliberately get off task. Here's what the Susan Engel found was that the teachers who had been told have fun doing the worksheet, most of them would redirect the students back to no, don't put that in the water. This is follow the worksheet. Right? The teachers, meanwhile, who had been told have fun learning about science, would encourage students to keep experimenting. They would say, well, that's interesting. What would happen if you put this in the water to see what happens there? So a very simple prompt of telling teachers whether the assignment was doing the worksheet or having fun learning about science changed everything. So when you think about that for a moment, if that simple prompt can change how teachers interact with students, what is the cumulative effect of telling teachers, here's the curriculum, here's the test, you've got to cover the material, as opposed to saying, really what you want to do is help kids learn about science or learn about mathematics or learn about literature and have fun doing it. So hopefully you're now saying, well, this is interesting, right? How would I do this in my school if you're a principal, if you're an educator, or how do we help this happen in our schools? So here, really what it requires is changing our mental model for how we go about teaching and learning. As I mentioned before, we tend to do it this way. Well, actually, pause a moment. First, I want to help you understand what we mean by curiosity, because there's actually different forms of curiosity. And this is really important to understand before we think about how we design learning around it. So the first type of curiosity is this. Sometimes it's called diversive curiosity. I like to think about it as a spark. It's that spark of initial interest. It's when something catches your eye and you want to learn more about it. And it's very powerful. It gets the process started. However, just like a spark, it can quickly fade. So there's another form of curiosity that's important here. But the way we get those sparks to happen are through things like mysteries, puzzles, controversies, cognitive conflict, which is when something doesn't square with your expectations. As I'm driving to work this morning and suddenly the moon goes dark, well, that was surprising. That creates a little bit of curiosity. We want to go beyond that first initial spark to do something else and create something else that's called informational curiosity, which is, I like to think of more as that flame of ongoing interest. This is the kind of curiosity that we think about, that led to the creation of algebra, for example, or Islamic scientists mapping the muscles and organs of the human body as far back as the 10th century. So we want our students to have this deeper form of curiosity, which is really when one question leads to the next, when one discovery reveals that, oh, now there's something else I don't know, and I want to explore the answer to that. So it's basically one question leading to new questions. We want our students to have that sense of informational curiosity. And ultimately, where we want to get them to is something researchers call trait curiosity. To identify ourselves as curious individuals, it becomes part of our personality. People look at us and go, Dr. Ahmed is always curious, right? And all those positive things that I shared with you earlier are all connected with trait curiosity. So better relationships, better job performance, better leadership, better longevity, better life satisfaction is this, it's trait curiosity. How do we develop trait curiosity? Well, it's really when we feel safe asking questions, when we feel admitting, and when we have opportunities to explore personal interest or find our own personal interest in what we're studying. If we're studying history, to find a connection to what we're learning about history. So here's a point that I also like to bring up a lot. There's a cognitive scientist, his name is John Medina. He's written a fascinating book called Brain Rules. He makes this point. If you wanted to create an education environment that was directly opposed to what the brain was good at doing, you would probably design something like a classroom. That teach, practice, test cycle is really not what our brains are good at doing. Our brains are actually really good at exploring. So often though, what we do is this sort of typical approach to teaching. We might pull something directly out of the standards. This is an example, right? And we might say to students, okay, good morning. Today's assignment is we're going to analyze the effects of resource availability on organisms and populations in an ecosystem. So not exactly thrilling, but we dive in, open your books to page 42. Let's get started. But what if instead of just tackling the content area directly, if we said we want to invite students in to this idea of organisms in an ecosystem and what happens when there's resource availability and resource scarcity, what would illustrate that? We might say, what if we took this example of the woolly mammoth and said, let's explore what actually killed the woolly mammoth. It's this enormous creature, very well adapted to its environment, so well it is spread out across the world. In fact, bones of the woolly mammoth have been discovered on the Arabian Peninsula, so likely there were woolly mammoths at one point roaming Bahrain, right? So we could invite students in to say, what happened? How did this perfectly adapted creature go extinct? And then we want to continue asking those questions that promote student thinking instead of simply asking them to recall learning. So the one way to think about this, it's the difference, but the idea is we want to ask productive questions that produce thinking as opposed to reproductive questions that simply call upon students to recall what we've already told them. So for example, we might say, all right, we've been learning about different theories for why the mammoths disappeared: disease, climate change, humans hunting them. Which seems the most plausible to you? And begin getting students to think like scientists, because scientists are always trying to figure out what's the answer to this question. Or you might ask a question like this: how might the demise of a large herbivore like the mammoth have affected the rest of the ecosystem? You can see we're still teaching the standards. We're talking about different kinds of creatures, herbivores. We can be talking about resources in an ecosystem, but we're drawing students in, right? We're helping them think about, okay, so if there's no more mammoths, then what happens? Okay, so there's more grass, but then what happens to the saber-toothed tiger or the predators that relied on the mammoth?
I think that he is disconnected. Just we will wait until he's reconnect his presentation and his laptop or internet. Maybe there is an issue. We will see and we will wait. I'm very happy and pleased that we've written and we've understood some really crucial elements about curiosity. Brian gave me his books because he is a publisher and his company is a publisher, and they wrote many books about curiosity. There is a book called Curiosity Works, which is really good. It's a good guide for schools and university to help the staff as well as their students to engage them in that process. And it is really a workbook process, starts from A to Z to show the teachers how to move to that direction. There are other books, lots of books. Just if you write Mackrell there, you will find lots of ideas. I also met Brian in Australia, where he is providing consultancy and work to many schools in Australia and America. And his recent work is working now in Alaska with I think the governments there to improve their school system. So he is well known and he is really good in that part. So if you have any questions, once he returns, and you can ask and see and learn from his ideas, learn from his experience in that direction. We are just waiting for him. We will see. Let me contact him and see.
wait, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, تفضل.
There is, for the meantime, we will take a comment from Dr. Daf, or you can speak either in Arabic or English because there is interpreter. Go ahead, Doctor, please.
Okay, ترجع this time.
I'm back.
Yeah, hi,
You
it's
missed
okay. Yes, go ahead. Just we chat about where I met you in Australia and the books that I wrote. I read about Curiosity That Works, the guide, which is really good. So I spoke about that while you are just reconnecting. Go
Great.
ahead. The floor is yours, Brian.
Where did I lose you? What was I talking about as I cut off?
I think that at the last point you just cut off, which is where you talked about the movement for teachers and schools, where school leaders to move in that direction.
Okay, so let me see. So let me find the correct slide. I'll go back to that. So talking about how we build curiosity in schools.
Yes.
Different model for learning. Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't lose too much then. Okay, I was afraid I was talking for 20 minutes. Okay. Hang on one second. Okay, so let me do this.
Now it is with notes.
We had talked about that. Okay, and then so I think I was right here saying we need to
Now,
shift.
yes, Brian, it is, yeah, perfect. Now it's perfect.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great, and I think I made the point, I don't know before I cut off or not, that testing is okay. We want to test our kids sometimes to find out what they've learned, but we really want to extend their learning into something deeper. So what we think about is, instead of this model, the traditional model of teaching and learning, we want to think about something that's more comprehensive, that also aligns with how we think about curiosity. So our model, we think about a 6-phase model for learning. We want to help kids become interested in learning. We want to use those mysteries, puzzles, cognitive conflict, whatever it might be, to get that spark of curiosity going. We also then want to help kids, students, commit to learning, to set their own goals. And oftentimes the best way to do that is to start with their own question, an I wonder statement. I wonder about this. I want to learn about this. I want to master this learning going forward. And so that kind of gets the spark going. But then we think about, how do we keep we can do that visually, but also through really good questions, those kinds of questions that keep students thinking about their learning. It's critical that students only remember what they think about, so we want to engage them in opportunities to think about their learning, and along those same lines, to make sense of their learning. This is where we think about cooperative learning coming in. You pause. If we were doing this in a live workshop, I would be giving you all lots of moments to pause, work in small tables, to think about what you're hearing, to discuss that, to connect it back to prior knowledge, because some of you that are educators might say, oh, this reminds me of some things I've done, I've heard in the classroom. And then we need to get to this notion of trait curiosity. How do we get the fire inside to learn? So we want to give students opportunities to practice their learning. We know repetition is the key to memory, but we also want to add to that reflection. We want our students to pause every once in a while and say, well, what doesn't make sense to me yet? What have I not yet mastered? You know, why can't I kick the ball in a curve like my teammates can? What do I need to do differently? So curiosity comes back in when we're practicing, and ultimately we want to give our students lots of opportunities to extend and apply their learning into something deeper, to do that research project, and to make a historical argument, to connect current life maybe to what's happened in the past, or to analyze literature. It's the application piece that's really important, and research shows that's how we're going to get learning deep into students' memories, so they don't forget it 30 days after being tested on it. So now you might be wondering, okay, this sounds fascinating. I would love to do this. How do I build curiosity into my school? Well, it's not the usual approach. It's not like, here's the program that you go apply. It's a different approach. And really, it starts with this. We want to create the same conditions for teachers and for adults that we want for our students. So for example, we want to encourage explore, and to learn from their mistakes. They might try different questions in the classroom, realize that some work, some don't. Okay, what do I do differently next time? It's really about also fostering what's called the growth mindset, where people understand that imperfections are okay. That's what I learned from. That's how I get better. That we can all keep growing, that we never arrive and say, now I'm a master teacher. It's all done. But there's always something new to learn. And it's really also helping that spur thinking, not solicit answers. You're not trying to say, do it exactly this way, because every teacher is going to have to make this work in their own classroom with their own students in their own subject area at their own grade level. And it's supporting a lot of independent learning and investigation for teachers. So in fact, some of the schools that we've seen that have done this very effectively, they will start at one point. Usually as a group, they might decide, let's start by asking better questions. Then they'll quickly realize, well, we need to think about a different form of assessment, performance assessments. And then from that, they'll lead you, oh, but now we need better tasks and assignments to give our students. So it becomes teachers really digging deeply into an area that they find passion in. So really our approach to professional learning looks a lot like our learning model. We want to start by getting teachers interested. So you might start by sparking teacher curiosity and curiosity, right? How do we create experiences that challenge and engage students? Wouldn't it be great, if we could have our students coming into our classrooms every morning curious, right? And then as a team, as a teacher team, we create a shared goal to say, well, how are we going to do this? What's our goal? Where do we want to get to? Usually in a limited period of time. It's a time limited goal. Within 6 weeks, what do we think we can do differently? And then we want to focus on applying, maybe learning new strategies, applying them in the classroom. For example, maybe it is asking different kinds of questions, using questions to drive learning, not simply lecturing. We might then also think about giving teachers lots of time to collaborate, to contextualize what they're learning, to share, hey, I tried this and it really worked, or I tried this and it wasn't so effective. So helping teachers learn from each other, giving them opportunities in small teams to practice and reflect, looking at data all the time. If we think we're trying to improve student engagement, how will we know? And ultimately then over time, they begin to adopt new practices, enhance them, as I mentioned, kind of fusing one new practice, maybe it's better questions with the next one, which could be creating better learning assignments, those challenging extend and apply tasks.
Okay. Shall we take the comment from Dr. Dhafar? Go ahead, please. Unmute and go ahead. Can you unmute, please? Try yourself, Fadl. Just a minute, Doctor.
Okay,
go ahead.
yes, I can, my friend. I can unmute now. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to thank everybody here at the Chamber of Commerce, yourself and Professor Wahib and everybody who's really working very hard on this education topic, which is really very important for Bahrain. I also want to thank Dr. Brian Goodwin for his wonderful presentation. Excellent. The ideas are great. I hope he can see me. Dr. Goodwin, I don't see him in the pictures here, but if he can hear me, I know that if you want to apply all what you have said in the United States, it's peanuts, it's not a problem. It will be very easy. But let's say welcome to the real world. If you come down to Bahrain, I wish your presentation or your lecture also is passed to the Ministry of Education here in Bahrain, and to the administrators at the Ministry of Education, to the teachers. The problem is what it clashes with is our culture. Since we are young, since we are children, we have not been trained to this kind of thinking that you are really you have presented to us, which I wish we can. Because I believe in all what you have said, that curiosity is the way to success, the way to progress, is the way to help our kids think for themselves, and in the future can think for their country and they can even improve their country if they really can think, instead of sitting back home and relying totally on their country to do all their work. It's really, really important that we should start by going to the educators. I know we have a lot of educators today with us, Dr. Goodwin, but you know, the educators in Bahrain this has been a long story, and we have been discussing this many, many times. When are we going to have our kids start thinking for themselves? Our kids need to think for themselves if they want to excel. We need them to be creative. We need them to be to feel that they can do something. They can experiment. I like the idea that they need to experiment. They need to make mistakes. They need to make mistakes so that they later find out how they can adjust. Yani what you were saying, Dr. Goodwin, is great, but I hope that this requires cultural change, and I hope that this really can be done in a place like our dear Bahrain, because Bahrain is a very highly educated society in the whole area around us, and I think we deserve to be given a chance to help our kids become curious. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dhafar, for this comment. If Brian there, could you please reply, or I will just share my comments from my experience working with you, Brian.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I think that is what we're talking about, is helping students think for themselves. We still want them learning, right? We still want them, there's a base knowledge we want them to have, but it really does no good if you've learned a bunch of science but can't think like a scientist, or can't apply that to the world around you, or you've learned how to solve math equations, but when you see a real life problem, you can't solve those problems. So it really is about becoming practical. Same, you know, and we want our students to, that's how they become entrepreneurial, if they can think for themselves, right? We have a lot of challenges that we're giving our children, unfortunately. We need them to be curious to help us solve some challenges all around the world too. So I agree with that comment. I think it really is developing critical thinking skills, which is the heart of that is curiosity. Keep asking new questions. Do I really have the answer yet? Or do I need to keep digging deeper on that?
I think that, Brian, also, you haven't reached to the end of your presentation. I think there are a couple of slides. If you would like to talk about them or to share with us, it's yours.
Let me share them with you quickly. Hopefully I don't cut out. I guess I'm creating curiosity because I keep dropping out. You're wondering, what was he going to say next? So let me share with you the data points, like why this matters and why this can be effective for schools. Because I think we're all trying to improve student achievement. So we need to know, is this going to help our kids? And with the current realities that we face too. So let me start from here. I'll probably need to switch one more thing so you can see it correctly. Okay, the question is, does it work? And so as I mentioned, we first encountered this work on curiosity in a place called the Northern Metropolitan Region in Melbourne, Australia, which is in fact where Dr. Ahmed and I met, was in Melbourne. Now, it was 75,000 students, a very large system, and they had decided, instead of doing the usual, let's go adopt a new math program, because their scores were very low, the lowest in the state of Victoria. They said, let's instead think about improving literacy, numeracy, and curiosity. And so they started here. They had a number of students who were not performing really on a post-secondary track. And within 3 years of focusing on curiosity, the initiative was called Curiosity and Powerful Learning. You'll see what they did. And let me just unpack these numbers, because I think when you think about it in terms of actual students, it becomes pretty powerful. So they reduced the number of students who were at risk by 3,000. And then they also did this. At the top end of the band, they added 6,000 more students who were on track. In other words, the entire bell curve moved for them, which is difficult to do in a large system of 75,000 students, hundreds of schools, thousands of teachers, 75,000 students. So I think that's pretty phenomenal growth. Let me help you, and basically, it's almost 10,000 students' lives were changed in a relatively short period of time. Let me give you another example, and this is actually from one of our employees, Tanya Gibson, who was the assistant principal in Green Hills Primary in Victoria. She was part of this Curiosity and Powerful Learning. And here was her experience. They began focusing in her school, which was I would say it was a good school, but it wasn't a great school. It was probably, frankly, underperforming where they should have been for the kinds of students they had. So they began focusing on what would it look like to really drive learning with inquiry. Now, they initially had an implementation dip. Things got worse. And this does happen, right? When you first try something new, it's never quite as smooth as maybe what you were doing before. But they stuck with it. And then they had an immediate jump in test scores. And they were basically now near the top of the state of Victoria. So it can help kids at the top end of the spectrum. But let me also give you an example of a school that we've worked with here in the United States, Jellicoe Elementary in Jellicoe, Tennessee. It's in one of the poorest regions in the US, Appalachia, a lot of coal mines, a lot of historic poverty, generation after generation of poverty. And so Jellicoe is one of the 73 schools identified in Tennessee as being priority schools. They were so low performing that they received extra state assistance to improve. And in the first year of working with them, we really just focused on this question of how can we better engage our students? Because our initial walkthrough of the school with the new principal, we saw that there was no joy in learning. Teachers were burned out, teachers were frustrated, teachers felt like these kids will never learn. And so we focused on engagement, creating classrooms where kids could ask questions, where they could explore a little bit more. And we had an immediate gain bump in performance. And compare that to what was happening in all those other priority schools that were receiving the same amount of funding, but likely they were just saying, well, what's the new math program? What's the new reading program? We are still working with them. In fact, we have people on the ground in Jellicoe today. I don't have 2020 data for you because of the pandemic. They didn't have a statewide test, but the gains are continuing. And so we obviously want to help them keep that bar increasing so that we have more and more students who are now on track for success later in life. So I guess I'd finish with this point, and then Dr. Med, we can share some questions, but I really think it comes back to Plutarch, the Roman philosopher, made this comment 2,000 years ago, that the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. And I think as educators, that's what we're trying to do, right? We want to light a fire inside all of our students. And I think about, if we could do that, think about for each student, what it means for them to have a fire inside, where that will lift them to. But then also think about what that could mean for us, for you all in Bahrain, for us as a global society, if we have our students curious and the light they can shine into the world and what they can do for us and the problems they can solve if they can become curious and critical thinkers too. So I'll leave you with that thought. We can circle back. Here's some information, and I will also make this this entire presentation available as a PDF if you want to see the slides later. Here's my contact information, but let me take the slide down so we can see each other and have a conversation. So the opportunity to share my perspectives with you.
Thank you, Brian, for this wonderful presentation. You make us really curious about implementing this process in the region and with our schools to see whether our students will be really curious enough to progress and impact on their learning rather than seeking good results or good grades. So I'm back with you. If there is any question or comments you would like Brian to comment on or to answer, yes, go ahead. Either from questions or the questions, say it.
You can ask them to raise a hand.
You can raise your hand if you have any question. Yes, go ahead, Professor Wahib.
Hey, Dr. Ahmed, oh, go ahead.
Yes, Professor Wahib, he is the chairperson of Education Committee. Brian, he has a comment or a question. Go ahead, Professor Wahib.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brian. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. It's really interesting. We really want to thank you for all this. And now the consultancies that have been giving to the GCC countries regarding this curiosity, deeper learning. Have you approached local authorities in the GCC in Bahrain about giving such consultancies yet to them or to the schools available under their jurisdiction. Have you done anything on that sort, or you have a plan to do something like that? Has anybody before you done such consultancies in the region? This is my question.
Not as of yet. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say not as of yet in the GGC region. I think we have. We are. He may be on the call. We are in some conversations in Qatar with Qatar University, helping them think about curiosity. For some people, they connect it to STEM. You know, this idea of well, engineering and technology. It shouldn't just be learning science; it's doing something with science. And so I think sometimes that's one entry point, is to think about how could we really do what we've always said we wanted to do with STEM by really helping students become curious. So at the moment, I would say we're just in the initial conversations. Certainly, you know, Dr. Ahmed and I are both very curious, I think, about what this could look like in the Gulf region. But I hear the same response, because as I mentioned earlier, I've been in UAE at a conference there. I've been in Qatar, and I hear people say the same thing. This is what we need for our students. In fact, I hear the same thing if I'm in Palau in the Pacific. People realize it's curiosity that we want for our students. And the point is, your students are curious. They may not show it in school, but they are curious. It's just, how can we unleash that curiosity that they already have, that they naturally have when they are in a classroom?
Thank you, Brian. There is a person, his name is Ali, I think. His hand is raising. Yeah, go ahead, Ali.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I would like to thank Mr. Ahmed for his efforts, and I'd like to thank Mr. Brian for his wonderful presentation. Now, in order to unleash the curiosity of our students, and this is, I think, an international problem where many countries are facing. Now, in order to unleash and enhance the curiosity of those poor students, we need to go from what's so-called CCC into DCC. Now, the CCC, the first CCC, stands for competition, conformity, and compliance. So very often we are so focused on these to do standardization, whether we talk about the standardization testing or to reach a standard required. Now, the DCC are diversity, collaboration, and creativity. So these are the new trend in education in order to enhance and unleash the curiosity of students. So in order to do the DCC, we need to show our students the benefits of what they are learning practically. So I think even nowadays, even when people are doing their PhDs in different fields, they are asked what your PhD is going to do on the ground to people. So this is standardization. I'm not saying we need to avoid or eliminate the first CCC. They are still required. Standardization is a bit important, and it's the first stages, I shall say. But in order to unleash and light on those lights that Brian showed us a moment ago, we need to do these, the DCC, the diversity, where students are very diverse, the way they learn is diverse, even teachers are diverse when they teach something. So if I teach physics, it's different than when I teach math, it's different than when I teach things in vocational education. And collaboration. So one mind, if I think myself alone, I think it's not very good practice to stay in this life for 60, 70 years and you think alone. This is a bit collaborative, whether between students and between those who are in charge. And creativity. Human being is extremely diverse and creative. So if we keep people in a small box, then they will think that the whole world is just a small box. No, we should unleash. As you said, I like the word unleash. and enhance the creativity by doing these. And we'll keep the standardization stuffs needed because they are still needed. So I just wanted to comment this. And again, I would like to thank Mr. Ahmed and Dr. Brian very much for their efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali, for that. I really appreciate your comments, which is really enlightening. I like it a lot with diverse sessions and the way that we engage students in that direction. If there is any comments from you, Brian?
Yeah, so this is not incompatible with standardization, right? We still have things we want our students to learn that we have agreed are important. I think what it requires sometimes, we talk about unpacking the standards, looking at what's in the standard and saying, we talk about enduring understanding. What's the thing that I might teach a student when they're 8 or 18, but I want them to remember it when they're 80 years old? And from there, now we can start thinking about what are the activities, what's the project, what's the experiment that would get students to that understanding. And to your point, also, teachers need to work together on this. This is too difficult to do on your own. And that's one thing that we see also in systems everywhere. We ask teachers on their own to create lesson plans for an entire school year. Why not work together? Why not create sort of a repository of great approaches, great ways to think about units, great approaches to lessons, and work together? And I think that is a key cultural shift that some schools find they must make in order to move forward with this. We need teachers working together as colleagues and collaborators.
Good. There is from Professor Muna. Go ahead. And then we will come to you. There is a question. We will answer it from Amal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Professor Muna.
Good day to everyone. Professor Brian, I'm very glad to hear your comments and your to look at your slides and the ideas that you presented. It's really very interesting. And as an educationist, I built all my educational theories and practice over the past 36 years on 3 very important elements. Intrinsic motivation, high self-esteem, and low anxiety. And this is where I built all my educational institutes, schools K-12 and universities all through the levels. It proved to be very successful because once you ignite that kind of motivation into your learners, then they will be very much ready to receive whatever material you present to them. In addition, of course, to what you have enlightened us with, the making things more interesting, working on their curiosity, and of course, the result is very much pleasing and how would I say, 100% successful, as our students are doing very, very well in all the STEAM and STEM tests and so on. And I think what you have said is 100% right, from a person who started from a teacher to a university professor. We went through all of that, and we had a hand-on experience, and the results are there speaking for themselves. Thank you, and thanks also for all those who worked on organizing this webinar. It's very, very interesting, and I hope you will visit our schools if you ever come to Bahrain. It's Al Hikmah International Model School and Gulf Universities. It is the actual practice and theory of what I have just said.
I would love that. And please reach out to me. I would love to learn more about your school. I love that intersection of intrinsic motivation, self-esteem, and low anxiety, because I think that is what we're talking about also with curiosity, where if you realize that, okay, I don't know something, that's not the end of the world, right? That's not, that's the beginning of curiosity, is recognizing I don't know something. And every great discoverer started not knowing something, right? Every great invention started with somebody saying, I don't know how to do this. So I love that. I would love to visit your school someday and learn more about it. Please do reach out. Appreciate that.
Please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mona. And I have a good question from Amal, as usual. Amal is a person who works with the schools and enhances schools. Her question is for you, Brian.
Yeah.
Is there a clear difference between motivation method and curiosity method?
Not knowing exactly what you mean by motivation method, but I think it's a little bit what we just heard from Professor Mona, that sometimes the difference is, and curiosity is really more about intrinsic motivation. And that's not to say that there aren't times that we do extrinsically motivate our students, right? There are times that sometimes, though, for young students in particular, to have prizes if they do their work, or for behavior, that can work. But we do know that over time, extrinsic rewards have diminishing returns. We have to keep ramping up the extrinsic reward to get the same result. So I think sometimes motivation method, people might rely too much on external motivators and not enough on internal intrinsic motivators. So the curiosity is really about intrinsic motivation, but also intellectual stimulation. It moves us more towards engagement. I'm not talking about entertaining students. This is engaging students intellectually. So I think I don't know maybe enough about what you mean by motivation method. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but I do think the emphasis, curiosity brings us more towards intrinsic motivation, perhaps. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I know that you are working now in a big project in Alaska. The other question is, you know that the impact when education system changes, the impact it matters for all students. From your experience, do you think that working with individual universities or schools matters and students are curious enough to impact on their learning? Or it's better where there is a province or an education system in a country, they move to that direction?
So I'm going to probably hedge my bets here a little bit, Dr. Ahmed, but you can move faster, certainly with an individual school. So if you are a principal in an individual school, you might find it's easier to do this individually. I will say, though, when I think about the experience in Northern Melbourne, it was a system-wide intervention. And that became important because then they could benchmark from one another. One school could look at what another school was doing and learn from that. And they could also start to they created these basically rubrics that we have replicated ourselves, but helping teachers understand, well, what do good questions look like? And that was easier done at a system level. So I think we also know that what can happen is it's not difficult to create pockets of excellence or bright spots in individual schools, but too often the system will get in the way. So I think it's always better to have the system supporting this. And I think we can maybe see the old adage, to get somewhere fast, go by yourself, but to go far, go together. And I think we can go farther together. So I would encourage this really more at a system level, or if you're going to do this at an individual school level, see if you can't connect with some other schools so you've got other folks to learn from. Because somebody else made the comment earlier that really it is about collaboration and working together on this. And that's how we can really change outcomes for students, is at a bigger picture. I
will take two. One is in Arabic. His name is Ahmed. Said ممكن مداخلة. Yes, Ahmed. And then I will go to you, Dr. Dhafar, and we will wrap up. Go ahead, Ahmed. Even in Arabic, it's okay. Ahmed. Ahmed wrote, I think, in Arabic. Shukran. Thank you, Doctor, and what you said. But there are some teachers, they believe in their strategies. Yes, he said that it's a really good strategy, but is it you, Ahmed? Can you talk?
Yes. Yes, thank you. The mic was mute. I do apologize for that. Mr. Brian, first of all, let me allow myself to say, Kingdom of Bahrain, I'd like to say thank you very much for this amazing information to share it with the public in here. I believe students, they don't require the motivation to do anything, but they require the inspiration from within, which is the internal motivation to activate their genius, because most of them, they are genius, and we need to create the environment for them to expose this beautiful genius. And I really, really admire what you said. I think what we require to have a paradigm shift to understand what you said. Anybody who click what you said, I think they are in the right track of shifting the educations, not just in Bahrain, I think globally. And what you share, it's amazing. I do appreciate you, and I hope the good luck for you to come to Bahrain and the rest of the world. Thank you.
I would really enjoy that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ahmed. There is Ahmed wrote in Arabic. I don't know whether this is Ahmed or not. I will take 1 minute, not maximum than 1 minute, for Dr. Dhafar. Then we will go to another name. It's A.B. Al-Mannai. Go ahead, Dr. Dhafar.
I think he needs to be unmuted.
Yes.
Now. Okay, I can. Yes, I am unmuted now. Okay, thank you very much, Ahmed. Dr. Brian Goodwin, I'm going to say it quickly. And to be frank with you, really, maybe what you're talking about requires a couple of years ahead to make it come true, because I believe big people, old people like me and like many other people, unless they came from a family that is open-minded and they encouraged curiosity and encouraged all the things you're saying, it is very difficult to train people after they at a certain age to do what you're talking about. I am going back to kids. Kids are the ones who we should really start with, and we should go back all the way. Kids start, they have two choices. Either there's teacher, mothers and fathers train them to be open-minded, and they can be curious, and they can express themselves, and they can speak what in their mind, or good teachers who need to be trained to do that. And that is something that we need to work on. We need the Ministry of Education, and I'm saying it because I am retired, so nobody's going to put me in jail. We need really the people at education to go to their teachers of the kids, the young kids, and train them, give them a chance from the beginning to become curious, to express themselves, to open their mind, and to excel and go ahead. And when they grow up, they will serve better their country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dhafar. If you have any comments, Brian, go ahead.
We have
there's
an English expression: you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think you were sort of saying that. I think though, and one way to think about this, maybe Dr. Ahmed, this goes back to your question about how do we make this happen at a systems level. Sometimes it works best to think first about who could be your early adopters. Is there a school, is there a group of teachers that would move forward on this first? Because we know that this is the way people work. A lot of folks are waiting to see a good example, see somebody else doing it. And then if they see somebody else doing it, then I can say, okay, now I could see this happening in my own classroom. I will share one experience that Tanya Gibson had when she was working in Green Hills. She had a teacher it was her last year of teaching. So a 30-year, veteran of teaching, who said, I don't understand any of this inquiry-based learning. It's not how I was taught. It's not what I learned when I was in college, and resisted it, the arms folded the whole time. But over time, as she got to seeing some of her colleagues using questions in the classroom in a different way, she said, okay, I'm gonna try this myself. And by the end of the school year, it was her last year, she said, you know what? I'm the best teacher I've ever been because I've learned a different way to do this. So sometimes old dogs do learn new tricks, but they might need to see other people doing the trick first to see that it works for them. So.
Thank you, Brian. There is a question says that, can we, at a university level, can we measure, is there a measurement or assessment tool for curiosity to measure curiosity?
There are some out there. So some of the researchers that have done this work, Todd Kashtan is one. There are some tools out there. So as ways to measure this, there's also certainly lots of engagement tools. And sometimes also what schools can do, they don't have to get too sophisticated about it. In fact, Tanya's school, they just created their own engagement survey to say, let's ask our students, how engaged are you? And the students were pretty frank also. The students would tell them, we're really not very engaged in our learning. So there's different ways to do that, but we feel free to reach out afterward, and I can follow up on that conversation with you.
Last question, we will take it from Al-Mannai. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes.
I do. Yes.
Hi, I would like to thank you all, and if you allow me to introduce myself, I'm Abdullah Al-Mannai, the founder of the A Academy Education and Training. First of all, I want to introduce the A Academy. Then I have a question for Mr. Wan, if you allow me. The A Academy is established since 2015, when I was an electrical engineering student in the University of Bahrain, and I am proud that I was there. We established the A Academy because of a reason that a lot of my friends, they left the university because of mathematics. So this is so bad. But this is not because of their fault, but because of their cultural or mental fault, because they have to know that not all the university or the academic journey is about mathematics. You have to find another solution. That's why I established the Academy for peer tutoring and guide the other students. Since 2015, now we are an official or an institution in Bahrain. Since 2015 till today, we reached and more than 60,000 students benefit from us, and we got more than 200 teachers, volunteers, and we know the volunteerism is hard, especially in teaching. So alhamdulillah, we got a great result. But now we are establishing our new program in the EdTech, and I believe I don't know if there's any investors in Bahrain or in GCC country invest in the EdTech sector, because it's a new way. We believe in A Academy, and it's, I think, a great approach for the kids also. We have to elevate our level of teaching and the approach of teaching. So when we combine the technology and the multimedia, we will get a great result for any strategy we can implement it on it. So that's why we are building our content creation team in the educational organization to help the other students with our contents and our methods to improve them. That's why I want to ask, what if we use the technology and media, and what's the power of the technology and media for the students, especially in this generation? They are, they don't like to read anything. They just want to see and they want to play. So what do you think?
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, so there's nothing wrong with remote learning or online learning. I think what happened with the pandemic is so many people took what really wasn't working in the classroom and just put it online. But I've seen great examples of people using online learning to spark curiosity, to keep kids curious. Here's one example that I heard about. I think this was actually from Melbourne as well. I know it was the state of Victoria. Basically, during the pandemic, kids couldn't come together, so they said, let's create our own online magazine. And so students became their own journalists. They had to investigate. They had to write stories. The teacher could kind of guide what they were writing stories about. And then they would read each other's work, and they had a rubric for evaluating work. And so that's a great example of students can create an artifact that goes online. And they actually created each week they'd come together and say, what are the assignments for this week? How do we work together on this? So I think there's so many things that can be done with online. If you think about also sparking curiosity, share a video of something that is the way to spark curiosity. So I think, if you were to follow that 6-phase learning model and use technology, then the technology enhances what's already good. But I think what happened sometimes during the pandemic is we expanded the distribution curve of teaching quality and classroom quality. So that I think, and we actually did a study talking to students, and we found students saying, my teachers who were pretty good beforehand, or that were engaging before the pandemic, when they went online, it was actually engaging. My teachers who were disengaging, when they went online, it was terrible. So I think technology can, just like anything else, it's an accelerator. It enhances what we're doing. I think we can use technology certainly for curiosity. So, by the way, I'm also very interested in learning more about your program at the Academy. So please send me some information. I want to check that out as well too.
We come to the end of this wonderful session. Really, I like it a lot, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that the attendees learned a lot. I would like to thank Brian for his time and effort for all this. It is not just a session for 1 hour. We have communicated with Brian for a long time in this session and how we will prepare it and what is beneficial for students and schools in the region. Really, thank you very much for your effort. I highly appreciate your support and your time in that. And I would like also to thank Dr. Wahib for his support, continuous support for us in the BCCI, and the staff here with me, Fawaz, Sayyid Fadil, and Aisha here. They are all here to support us to make this happen. And now we will come back to Aisha to close the session. And also, before I close it, the PowerPoint presentation, we have it. If you need it, we will send it to you. Just communicate with BCCI or myself as well. We will send it to you. If you have any questions, either directly you email Brian or email us in BCCI or myself, Ahmed, and I will share this information or question with Brian, and we will come back to you whenever and whatever you need. We will be pleased to serve you and to help you in that direction. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
Dr. Ahmed, thank you so much. And Dr. Brian, thank you. Thanks a lot. I would also like to thank Professor El-Wahib. Yes, and everyone who joined us today. Thank you for your curiosity in this topic. And I would just like to mention that you can find the same webinar on our YouTube channel, the channel of the Bahrain Chamber. Thank you so much and stay safe.
Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you. Ma salam.